external creditors for a possible debt restructuring. And so we're going to be talking about the drivers of Ghana's debt, because one of the big reasons why we're here today is because of our ballooning debts. They've become really unsustainable. And the reason why we're seeking a bailout support from the International Monetary Fund. So we're going to have two academic papers. There's going to be two presentations. First to be done by the Africa Center for Energy Policy, and that's on breaking the cycle of IMF support. Addressing governance inefficiencies and the drivers of public debt in Ghana. And then on the second part, that has to do with our domestic debt restructuring. As you may be aware, we just finished one, the first of its kind, and there have been implications for the banking industry. So Professor Bokpin will be taking that second paper on domestic debt restructuring and its impacts on our commercial banks. After we'll have a panel discussion, I'll introduce my guests to you when we get to that point. But I'd like to welcome all of you, and also to our international partners. We're also streaming live, I told you, on Facebook. And so it promises to be a very interesting discussion for the next 2 hours. Those of you watching us at home, you can also tweet at #3BusinessSummit. Let's know what you make of today's discussion. My name is Pakwesi Asare, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's discussion. Let's quickly delve into the subject for today. But before that, let me welcome Francis Doku. He is the managing director of the 3 Group. Please put your hands together for him. Head of 3 Group, Francis Doku. Please put your hands together for him.
Thank you, Pakwesi. Our distinguished partners, Africa Center for Energy Policy, Imani Africa, distinguished speakers, and here I want to acknowledge the 2 main speakers, Mr. Benjamin Boakye of ASAP and Professor Bokpin of the University of Ghana, as well as our panelists who Pakwesi will introduce when we get there. We're very grateful for your time today. Invited guests, colleagues from the media, ladies and gentlemen gathered here, and those watching us and listening on TV3 and 3FM, as well as those engaging us on social media. Let me extend the warmest regards from the Group Chief Executive of Media General, Madam Beatrice Ajiman, the board and management of the Media General Group, as well as the hard-working team at TV3 and 3FM, and especially the 3 Business team to you all. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the 3 Business Economic Sustainability Summit. This morning, our first of many such partnerships we envision with ASAP and Imani Africa, where we'll be discussing the drivers of Ghana's economy and the economic efforts. Today, we are focusing on the public debt and the impact of the ongoing debt restructuring program, which has triggered heated debate and reactions from bondholders, pensioners, as well as other stakeholders. Some of the people who have had to sacrifice their investments to support the program, which, as we understand, is a key requirement for the International Monetary Fund program our government is seeking. Ladies and gentlemen, recent discussions about Ghana's debt management and medium-term economic recovery have focused on the country's cyclical economic crisis. It has become a prevalent topic, with many people noting that Ghana is now seeking another support from the IMF, which has necessitated this debt restructuring program, among other fiscal and non-fiscal measures. The government has made significant progress on domestic debt restructuring, with a subscription rate of approximately 85% of eligible bonds. That notwithstanding, the pressing need to address Ghana's mounting debt, the factors driving the debt, and the potential socioeconomic implications of the country's approach towards debt restructuring have received limited attention. The danger here, we note, is that this lack of discussion can lead to a limited understanding of the entire process by the public and impede efforts to identify effective solutions that ensure that long-term sustainability of the economy. So for us at Media General, and especially the 3 Business, and with the buy-in of our partners, ASAP and Imani Africa, we thought that it was indeed time to place the debt restructuring program on the chopping board, and to ignite discussions at the highest levels of civil society, the financial and business community, government actors, and the media. The aim is to indulge an open and nuanced dialogue which will be directed towards prompting decision makers on the need to achieve, on the macro level, a delicate balance between economic growth and fiscal responsibility. Ladies and gentlemen, it is in view of this that we have teamed up with ASEP to line up some of the leading names in economics, business, academia, social advocacy, and the law to have conversations about these very pertinent matters of state. As we delve into these critical issues, let us remain focused and open-minded, seeking practical solutions that will improve social discussions and hopefully inform policy for sustainable economic growth for Ghana. We have noted, and Pakwesi has mentioned, that even though we are all here gathered, we would like to inform all of us that this program is live on TV3 and on 3FM. I also want to entreat us that we can continue to, as we're here, invite our friends and our networks to watch or listen on our platforms, or even go onto our digital platform where our MG Digital team is here to make sure that it is streamed online and a lot of engagements are happening with the hashtag 3Business Summit. I'm very grateful to all of you who have come here, and for those of you watching and listening from home or anywhere you may be, that you're part of this summit, and we look forward to a very fruitful deliberations. Thank you, and welcome once again to the 3Business Economic Sustainability Summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Francis Doku. He's head of 3 Group. Please put your hands together for him one more time. I'd also like to invite one of our partners, Imani Africa, represented by the president himself, Mr. Franklin Cudjoe. Please put your hands together for him.
Thank you very much, Pakwesi. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You know, on my way here, someone engaged me in a conversation and asked me, why another summit? Because we never get listened to by the leadership anyway. And I said I was optimistic. And he said, baseless, optimism is baseless. And I said, well, your duty, the people who are coming to speak are not tired of talking anyway. So your duty is just to listen. So your duty is just to listen and then take out the lessons and apply them effectively. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of ASEP and Imani, welcome to this maiden summit. Thank you very much.
The shortest welcome in world history. Thank you, Franklin. Put your hands together for him one more time. All right, so we go straight into our very first presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me. Welcome Professor Godfred Bokben with the University of Ghana Business School. Please put your hands together for him.
Good morning, everyone. All protocol observed. I am happy to see so many people here, especially one of my classmates, undergraduate, Francis. You've worked so hard. You know, when we were in the university, the hardworking ones went to industry and the lazy ones stayed in academia. Okay. So I chose to stay in academia, but thank you so much. You've made us proud. Thank you. Thank you. We are here to talk about something that I'm not sure is going to disappear in the next 30 years because the structure of our economy, and if you look at the policies we are putting in place, there is nothing to suggest that fundamentally we are going to change the structure that drives the outcome, right? And what that means is that it will require drastic measures. It will be painful in the present for a future we all can be proud of. The question is whether we are willing to pay that price for a future we will all be proud of. That is where the issue is. So, okay, can I get a pointer myself? Okay. All right, so my presentation is going to be very brief on the domestic debt exchange. We'll look at what what the implications are especially, and why we have to do this, because on the 1st of July 2002, Ghana eventually made a call to the IMF, expectedly, and then the process ensured that, unlike the previous IMF-supported programs that we have had, this one is a bit unique. And that is why we've had to go through some prior actions before the IMF board would approve the program for us. The recent one that we went through from April 3rd, 2015 to April 2019, even though Ghana's debt was classified as being high risk, we didn't have to restructure our debt because we still had market access. This time around, we've lost market access, practically from the international capital market and then also from the domestic markets. And therefore, there's the need for us to restructure our debts. I can skip this because all Ghana's problems, I summarize it in one slide. My boss from ASEP will talk a bit more about that. But this slide is just to tell you that once Ghana shared a birthday with some interesting countries, including Malaysia, okay, including Singapore. So you can see from the 1960s, thereabouts, you can see the part that Malaysia and Singapore took and where Ghana is. So at some point, we're almost at parity here, but now you can see the gap. You will be more than 78 times better off today living in Malaysia than in Ghana, and 80 times better being in Singapore than being in Ghana. I'm not saying you should relocate to any of these countries, but I'm just saying that as we sit here right now, there are other human beings on the face of the earth who are actually up here, and we are here. It's doable if we want to. Right? And then you can see how inflation has treated those of us in Ghana as compared to Malaysia and Singapore. In fact, actually in 1960, Ghana's GDP per capita was higher than South Korea. But today, you can see the gap practically, almost as though to say it's difficult to close now. Okay. Then why are we in this mess? Ghana, from independence, were known for agriculture. Today, Ghana is not known for agriculture. Ghana is known for service. But the question is Ghana really a service-based economy? The answer is no. Typically, if you look at the economic transformation, when a country begins off from agriculture and suddenly service is leading, it tells you that that economy is matured. So it's gone through that process. So, but in the case of Ghana, we started off agriculture being the leading contribution to GDP, and then we skip industry. That's what the data is telling us. And then we jump straight to where? Service. That service sector is actually not quality service. It's a sector that is driven by retail and wholesale, largely imports. So once your service sector is leading, particularly in the area of retail and wholesale, once your industry isn't doing well, then it means that the bulk of what is happening here is going to be what? Imports. Typically, once you import, you're actually exporting jobs to those countries where you are importing from and importing their unemployment into your country. So let's see what that plays out going forward. So you will see that approximately 1.6 million of Ghana's economically active population are out of work as we speak. And unemployment is higher among university graduates between 23 and 29. It's as though the easiest way to become unemployed today is to go to the university, because that's what the data is telling us. Right? It may also be because choices of tertiary education is not based on labor market outcome. People just want to go to the university, either to satisfy family aspirations or whatever, but not really that is driven by the labor market development. And so we need to look at aligning our skill set and all of that. What makes it a bit interesting for me is that forecasts exist that Ghana's population will reach 45 million by 2040. And from that data, we are told that 58% of that population they will be less than 30 years. What will be the characteristics of that age group? They will probably would have finished universities and a free senior high school, quantity, less quality, right? And then they will be looking for jobs that probably exist in the textbook. So chances are that if we are not careful, we could actually ask all our youth to major in job creation, and yet they may finish school and not get jobs. Because there are real fundamental things that we need to address going forward. We can skip this. The World Bank is telling us that between now and 2040, Ghana needs to create 10 million decent jobs, especially in the formal wage economy. That's what we should be working towards. How then do we enable the private sector as the engine of growth? Okay, and you have to be concerned if you look at the future and the challenges and the kind of measures we are putting in place today. Parliament just passed 3 additional tax bills and all of that. And if you look, Ghana alone, we have close to 23 different taxes in this small economy, right? It may not be that people are paying all this number of taxes, but if you look at the incidence of the tax across VAT, corporate tax, and the rest of them, you realize that there's practically no space for the private sector to actually engineer economic transformation and inclusive productivity growth. So you can see, because agriculture hasn't been doing well, you can see what inflation had been in Ghana with more than 83 ministers. We ended 2022 with inflation of 54.1%, but we can just go to the next slide and realize that Cote d'Ivoire's inflation is less than 5%, whilst COVID affected all these countries. Even if COVID originated from Ghana, we could have done better. At least we don't know where it came from. Okay, but what I know is that it's not from Ghana. Yeah. So you can see the dynamics: Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Kenya, Nigeria. Even Nigeria's inflation is trending downwards below Ghana. Nigeria is to be a good neighbor, but you see where they are heading now. So there are things that we need to take into consideration. So then you can look at how Ghana majored on the minor. Right. So everything was blamed on COVID. But the data is telling us that these are the countries that actually qualify to weep more than Ukraine. In any case, Ukraine may even get 8 IMF-supported programs ahead of Ghana. Okay. So you can look at Tanzania, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, Mozambique, Angola, Ethiopia. Ghana is not in the top 8. And the reason is simple. We can find that in the next slide. In terms of our exposure from the IMF estimation to Russia, Ukraine, you have wheat, and Ghana is not a wheat-consuming country. All right. But Cote d'Ivoire and the rest of them, virtually every bread, whatever you find wheat. Rice, Ghana's rice is not from Cote d'Ivoire, it's not from Russia, it's not from Ukraine. You know the rice you eat, where they come from, right? Yeah, there's no bullet flying in those countries where our rice comes from. Maize is not from any of this. We can move on to the next one, okay? So what typifies the economic crisis? So if you pick interest payment on our debt alone as a percentage of our total revenue, 2022, more than 44%. If you add that to compensation of employees, approximately 40%, and then statutory transfers, these 3 line items alone is 116% of Ghana's total revenue. If Ghana were to be a private sector firm and it still continues in operation, we will say that it's a Ponzi scheme, right? Because you just cannot generate enough to sustain your business model. Forgive me for my words, okay? We in academia, we speak our mind if we had one of our own, so please forgive me, right? So in our attempt to resolve that, growth would decelerate in 2023 to 2.8% per government forecast. It's simply because of the fiscal consolidation measures. It will impose immediate cost, and the sacrifice is growth, the sacrifice is employment. Okay. But the interesting thing is that, we can go back to the previous slide. The interesting thing is that, whilst the current economic challenges is debt-induced, Ghana government's contribution to solving the debt problem is just 0.7% of GDP in terms of primary balance. If your primary balance is positive, then you have entered into what we call debt-reducing fiscal deficit. You can still record a fiscal deficit, and yet your debt to GDP ratio will come down. right? So that is when your primary balance then is positive, okay? But we'll soon see why this is not sufficient. So we can we can skip this. Okay, so government hopes to mobilize approximately 144 billion Ghana cedis from this economy in 2023 alone. If you compare this to the figure for 2022, in terms of revenue terms, it will go up by more than 40% from this same economy. And that means that is how much private sector and households are going to give up in order for government to repair its balance sheet. And we are told that is not enough. So let's go to the expenditure side. So you can see that government is mobilizing revenue consistent with the economic challenges. But from the expenditure side, we are spending as though we are in the harvest season. So you can see how expenditure has gone up to 205 billion cedis. Okay, part of that also, you can trace that to one expenditure item that is in the budget now that my boss will talk about from the energy sector indebtedness, which is very huge. So we can move on to the next one. Okay, I can skip this. In terms of the causes, the deficits, let's move on to the next one. You can see our revenue below 13% or just 13.1%. Our peers are doing between 18 and 20%. Ghana Revenue Authority's own strategic plan ending 2022 has revenue to GDP ratio target of 17.5%, except that is not what we are working with. Okay, but it's in there. What do we see here? So we see that we have a very small direct income tax paying population of just a little above 2 million out of a labor force of approximately 14 million. So just some few people are actually paying direct income taxes, right? So to solve this, you don't introduce e-levy. To solve this, you don't increase VAT rate. To solve this, you broaden it and rope in other people. But we haven't done that. So in terms of the debt, in the last 10 years or so, you can see that the primary deficit, the difference between the expenditure and revenue alone, has contributed more. But the other interesting thing is depreciation. So if you have a debt composition as we have in a small open economy, if you don't manage your exchange rate very well, you will be exposed. So the depreciation alone has added approximately 28% to our debt to GDP ratio when you market to market. Okay, so if you value the external debt in CD terms, any depreciation manifests explicitly in additional debt. Okay, going forward. Okay, of course, we've been here before. In fact, in all the programs that Ghana had with the IMF, you will find that from 1965, when Dr. Nkrumah first made our first application to the IMF for fund-supported program, public debt was identified as an issue. And you will find ballooning public debt across all the 16 IMF-supported programs. So it tells you that since independence, we have struggled to manage our debt. And we've seen how debt-induced macroeconomic instability has brought us a lot of challenges. So in the HIPIC was also a form of debt restructuring, which we finished in 2004, and then the Multilateral Debt Relief Initiative, which we finished in 2006. When we were done, our debt to GDP ratio came down to less than 30%. What that meant was that we had fiscal space. We could inject growth through external debt financing. Then Ghana was under an IMF-supported program called the Poverty Reduction and Growth Facility. So what we did with that fiscal space was to file for a divorce from the IMF. And it wasn't so difficult for the IMF. They granted it. Of course, they knew that it would not be long and it will come back. All right. So that divorce was granted 2006. And then on the back of that, had a favorable credit rating, B+, went to the international capital market, did our first Eurobond in 2007 of $750 million at a coupon rate of 8.5%. It was then a floodgate for African countries. So it was almost like a league among African countries going to the Eurobond market, borrowing successfully, sometimes highly oversubscribed, and politicians interpreted that to mean confidence in our economy, but it was also because of the higher yield, right? So, of course, Ghana also joined. At some point in time, we had the Kinky and Wachi party, right? You remember? Okay, So our debt increased from that 26% end of 2006 to something more than 100%. Whilst we're talking about 88%, 100%, government was talking about 78% or less. So it got to a point our public debt was almost like multiple choice. Choose the one that you like. But thankfully, when the IMF came to town and they used their debt sustainability framework, there was greater clarity. So we were told that our debt to GDP ratio was actually 105%. Wow, we had borrowed in excess of the size of our economy. Let's clap for ourselves. I mean, it's right. So it's a lot of success borrowing, right? But of course, there's nothing wrong with borrowing, right? If you borrow and invest it in enhancing the cash flow generation capacity of the economy, then servicing the loan and amortization will not be a problem, right? But the question is, we've seen the rate of GDP growth, we've seen the rate of borrowing, and if you do all the mathematics, you realize that perhaps we have not invested those borrowed funds productively, efficiently, and I'm sure the deeper explanation will come from the ASAP presentation. We see how procurement and all of that tends to. So, unlike pre-HIPC, now our debt composition is different, and that is why the debt restructuring has generated a lot of noise, because majority of our debt now are in commercial, okay, commercial in terms of institutional and then individual and the rest of them. So in terms of external, majority of them are in USD. Of course, the Chinese effect is not that much, 3.3%. Of course, we shouldn't be worrying them that much. How much do we owe China? $1.7 billion. I'm sure one of you could easily pay that for Ghana, and then we move on, right? But we see how challenging that has become. Then, so majority of them now commercial, then we have multilateral and then bilateral. So in terms of the external debt, you will see this. So assuming you were made a consultant to Ministry of Finance and you had to restructure Ghana's external debt, where will you focus? You see Eurobonds alone, more than $13 billion. You see China, 1.7 billion. You see others, 3.2, multilateral, 8.1 billion, right? But very soon we understand why China is important. We understand why bilateral and the rest are very important. Let's move on to the next one. We can skip this. Okay. So Ghana is trying to reach out to a destination we are all proud of, but debt is holding us back. 70% of all our domestic revenue just goes to debt and its servicing. It leaves very little space for growth-enhancing spending. So if you see this, something has to be done about it. We can move on. Okay, we can skip this. So the IMF debt sustainability concluded that our debt is unsustainable, and that meant that we needed to take steps to restructure our debt. Okay, and what does that supposed to mean? We can move on to the next one. So, Ministry of Finance eventually told us that in September, there about 2022, our debt to GDP ratio in present value terms, approximately 105%, and we needed to reduce this to 55% by 2028. Ghana is classified as a medium debt-carrying country per the IMF debt sustainability framework. So if you're a medium debt-carrying country, then your debt to GDP ratio in present value terms should not be more than 55%. Okay, and Ghana is above 100%. In fact, if you add the depreciation from October to December cumulatively, in terms of its impact on our public debt, and you add that to the cutoff date to the IMF debt sustainability, then our debt to GDP ratio in present value terms was around 112% of GDP. Okay, because the discount rate the IMF uses is not that high, it's just 5%, so the difference was not that much, okay? So how then do you decelerate from, let's say, 112% or 105% to 55%? And the target was to achieve this by 2028, okay? So there are two key indicators the IMF is focusing on. Present value of debt to GDP ratio should not be more than 55%. We are supposed to achieve this by 2028. And then the external debt servicing as a percentage of total revenue should not be more than 18%. Currently, it's more than 29%. Okay, so we need to bring this down. So we need to demonstrate a credible plan that will be able to reduce our debt to GDP ratio in present value terms to this. Okay, so how does it work? reducing your debt to GDP ratio in present value terms from, let's say, 105% to 55% by 2028, and that of external debt service to revenue ratio from 29% to 18% by 2028, requires that you record a primary surplus of not less than 12%. Of not less than 12%. So we can go to the next slide, and then we'll see how that works. So assuming we even want to reduce it to, let's say, 70% from where, then we need to do a primary surplus of 9.4%. But if you look at Ghana's data, we need to do something in excess of 12%. Through fiscal adjustment alone, if we decide as a country that we want to reduce our debt to GDP ratio in present value terms to 55% by 2028 through fiscal adjustment alone, the level of taxes and expenditure cut, we cannot bear it. We cannot. It is from here that we conclude safely that debt restructuring is unavoidable, because no country practically in Africa will be able to deliver a primary surplus of, let's say, even 7% or even 5%. No. Probably 1.5% or so we can work towards, but this is practically, it's as difficult as asking fish to climb a tree, right? We can move on to the next one. So if you have that situation, then how do you bring your debt to GDP ratio down without burdening the system unnecessarily? So we have the triangle in terms of the theory. So fiscal adjustment, okay, structural adjustment or reforms, and then debt restructuring. How you manage this triangle determines the effect on the system or in the economy. We have chosen to major on debt restructuring, and that is how come that bar is here. Okay, and whilst fiscal adjustment is doing so small. So whilst fiscal adjustment is to do not less than 12%, or even let's say 10%, fiscal adjustment from government effort in the 2023 budget is just 0.7% of GDP, when we should be doing more than 10%. So it tells you that government, from government side, their contribution to reducing debt to GDP ratio is so what? Small. We can actually, so, and government is saying that in the next 3 years, through to 2026, they can only do average of 1.3% of GDP. So which means that there's a huge gap that must come from either debt restructuring and then structural adjustment. Structural adjustment, we have not started. We have not started. So the whole focus then gets to what? Debt restructuring. And that is how come we have what we have. So we can go to the next one. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Okay, so we've restructured our debt a couple of times in our history, so that the data is here to guide us. Let's move on to the next one. So government then sought out to restructure its debt. They started off with the domestic debt. On December 5th, they announced a universe of eligible bonds to the tune of 137 billion cedis, right? There was a pushback because the framework that we needed to have followed, the proper consultation and the strategy itself didn't work. So there was a lot of pushback. Eventually, government ended up restructuring eligible bonds of around 98 billion with variations. Of course, government claimed victory of more than 80% simply because we had to exempt other bonds that initially were included in the eligible bonds. Okay, so what does that do? If you look at the gains that government has made from the domestic debt exchange, it's not enough to close the gap. And therefore, there will be the need for us to restructure our external debt, both external, commercial, external, bilateral. Of course, guess what? Whilst the IMF made debt restructuring a prior action, the IMF and the other multilateral says that their debt is not open for restructuring. Right? Keep that in mind. So we have to focus on the Euro bonds and the others. Now, even though the IMF program is practically ready, the fund, it will not be practical for them to approve it because the funding gap is so wide. Okay, so the funding gap in the 2023 budget alone is over $5 billion. And that is why, in addition to the domestic debt restructuring, there's a need for Ghana to secure assurance from our multilateral and bilateral partners that either they help us close the funding gap through debt relief or fresh funding. Okay. All right, so let's move on to the next. So you see that the original domestic debt exchange that was announced, if government had gotten its way through the system, government would have, the fiscal savings would have been around 117 billion cedis. If the banks had signed on to the original domestic debt exchange, the impairment losses on their books would have been more than 80%. Okay. Now, with the revisions and all of that, now we are talking about impairment losses in present value terms of around 30%, simply because Bank of Ghana, together with the Institute of Chartered Accountants Ghana, had to agree on a discount rate that is lower than the market discount rate that should have been used, consistent with the IFRS 9, because that's what we have chosen in terms of our reporting standards. So we chose a lower discount rate in order to moderate the impact on the books of the banks. Now let's see the revisions and what it ends up quickly. Okay, so in terms of what we left with, what they signed at the end of the day, the impairment losses came to around 41 billion cedis. And if you distribute it across the number of banks, some are losing around $40 million, $80 million, and the rest of them across the 23 banks. In terms of liquidity losses, we are talking about something in excess of 6 billion cedis. What that means is that this would have been available cash flow to the banks that they could have lent to private sector and individuals. That is no longer available. Actually, the real effect, if you look at what depreciation has done to bank capital since recapitalization in 2018, depreciation alone has wiped more than 45%. So if you add that to this impact, my considered view is that in the next 3 years, there will be the need to recapitalize our banking industry in order to support the economic growth. Okay, because if you look at bank capital today, they can't really do any serious big-ticket transactions. Those are the implications. Either banks actively grow their capital from now through plowing back of profit, or shareholders will have to inject what? Additional capital. And then, of course, look at the same sector. Since COVID came, banks have been levied with a recovery levy of 5%. Now, the fiscal stabilization levy that was supposed to be a temporary thing is now a permanent tax handle. We've only given it a new name as growth and sustainability levy. So if you look at the effective tax rate in the banking sector alone, it's more than 35%. All right. Okay. So, and the DDE alone is enough to wipe out the combined profit in the sector, which will also have implications for our tax revenue. So I'll end it here, and then thank you very much for your attention.
That was a fantastic one. Please put your hands together for him one more time. Let me just quickly invite Benjamin Boakye, who's with the Africa Center for Energy Policy.
Thank you very much, Pakwasi. Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Franklin, I mean, we get asked the questions all the time. And one of the questions that was asked today was whether ASEP is now an economic think tank. And I told the person that the last time I checked, the Energy Ministry has always been part of the economic management team. But I don't remember the last time an economist headed that ministry. You know, we have a problem, and we need to pay attention to how we resolve that problem as a country. Can I have the slide on? I will have to rush through so that I can save time for, let's go. So what we are seeing essentially is that
They need to shift that. They need to shift that. It's affecting the presentation on screen. No, guys, quickly do that. All right, thank you very much.
okay, so, I mean, even before we left the IMF and our 16th arrangement, as we had with them, and Prof told us, that our debt was still, you know, headed on sustainability. And if you check, we had domestic debt and foreign debt almost at par for the period, but they split apart towards 2020, 2021. because of the borrowings that we were doing. But if you track our recurrent expenditure, it's always been going up. We keep spending more on consumption as a country. So that graph on that side shows how much we've been spending on recurrent. And around 2020, we went past our domestic revenue on just recurrent expenditure. And also, if you track our borrowings, we have almost stayed above the lower middle income average for borrowing from the capital market. If you check until, it's only 2017 when we did not go to the capital market that we borrowed at a lower rate than the lower middle income average. And again, if you check our interest payment as a percentage of our total revenue, it's always been going up. It didn't happen in 2020. It's been a trajectory that we've been on for more than a decade as a country. Let's go on. So if you are borrowing at that higher interest rate, in itself may not be a problem. You have to show how your investment will be able to repay that higher interest rate. If you're borrowing at 10%, 12%, and you can actually show that you will be able to repay the loan with the investment that you are putting in, that helps you to process how you repay that investment. So the question you need to answer really is, what investments are the borrowed funds being aligned to? And then what robust measures are instituted to track efficiency of spending of that money to ensure that you don't get into trouble after you have borrowed the money. So we see this graph there shows how much we've been borrowing cumulatively and how much of the money actually goes into capital investment. And you see those graphs widening. We are borrowing, but less and less of the borrowed funds actually goes into capital investment. And these are the real problems that we have to address if we are to stop this cyclical debt situation that we do have. Because if you're borrowing at an higher interest rate, and much of that money is also going into consumption, then you have a real problem being able to service that debt. And then also the robust measures that you need an efficient procurement practices, efficient state institutions to actually manage the borrowed funds. And then minimizing the excesses that comes with those things and ensuring that the state institutions actually function well. There's transparency in tracking the impact of the borrowed funds. So when we check the drivers of government debt, we realize that there are issues that are germane for us to address and move away from that cyclical problem. And one of them is procurement. If you look at procurement, the graph you see there shows how much of our total expenditure goes into restricted tender and direct sole sourcing. 85% of all our procurement. And these are projects that are listed on the website of Procurement Authority. It actually doesn't include the big ticket procurement that never go through competitive tender. And you can mention the Kelnys, the ID cards, all the billions that you can guarantee that they will be sole sourced. That is not part. These are the usual procurement. 85% of our total spend is through restricted tender and direct negotiation. We cannot proceed to be able to repay our high interest debt by going through this kind of procurement. And also, if you interrogate, I indicated that we were spending less and less of our borrowed funds on capital expenditure. But if you check some of the inefficiencies that are embedded, even at the point of spending a little on capital investment, it's incredible. I mean, there's one particular contract that we saw, LNR, where the Ministry of Finance 2016 wanted to support ECG to procure meters. They got credit facility from the Dutch bank through China Export Bank to be able to procure the meters, $80 million loan. Because the Ministry of Finance wanted LNR to do the procurement at all costs, they told Dutch bank to keep their money and they would go and borrow at 7.5 instead of 2.95. So they want to borrow at a higher rate to keep the company. So these are the kind of procurement system that we do have, and it's actually serving the needs of politicians and not generating value for citizens. Let's go. And again, you check our procurement system, we check our budget system. We don't plan for emergencies. When they come, we spend, we find money to spend. And when COVID even struck, we had zero balance in our contingency fund, even though the Constitution says we shall have a contingency fund. It was never established. We didn't put money in. We also see here the actual revenue that we generate and our actual expenditure. The gap that we see, it keeps widening. All right, from 21% to 79 in 2020 and 52 in 2022. So we are actually spending far more than we generate. And the fundamental question is that, is it sustainable to just focus on debt to GDP when your actual revenue, you are overspending it? You can't spend 52% more than your revenue and expect that some magic will happen with your debt to GDP. Because, I mean, the GDP calculation also has government spend at the plus side. And if you're not able to account for the corruption and the waste that we see in that calculation, how do you ensure that you'll be able to repay when the revenues are not matching your expenditures? Yes, and also some of the institutions are so inefficient. They're just a drain on the public purse. And we keep adding on the institutions. Some of the new institutions that we just recently created are taking more than 100 million cedis for their upkeep, for their administrative expense every year. So, and some of the activities that they are doing, you can actually allow either one of them to do it, or some existing institution can do the same thing. You have GISDEC and GUIDEC doing aluminum and iron ore, and we don't have the super discoveries that allow you to have that luxury of creating so many agencies to be able to optimize those resources. And they keep taking money from the budget, and they are not delivering any value to us. So we really have to check how these institutions are actually milking us. Okay, I think you can move on. And again, you check, after we have borrowed, we don't really have robust systems to be able to track what we do with the money. Parliament only approves. They don't have mechanisms to track how the borrowed funds actually perform. You have the audit service doing periodic performance audit on selected few of the project. And sometimes they do it 2-3 years after the projects have actually been delivered. So you don't really get anybody tracking how the borrowed funds actually generate returns for us to be able to repay those debts. So we also, put a spotlight on the energy sector, which is also a major trouble area for Ghana. And because if you check our exports, the energy and the extractive sector really mimics, our export mimics our GDP. So we have about 62% of our export revenue coming from gold and oil. So to be able to sustain your economy, you have to at least keep those sectors optimized, operating at a point where you know that at least the revenues that are coming from that sector will not decline. And that requires robust policy actions for you to be able to do that. Yes, for oil, I mean, we're seeing a decline, from 2019, that was about 70 million barrels a year. Now we are doing about 52 million barrels a year. So that is about 20 million decline. So the projections that we had that we're going to pay our debt with oil revenues is gone, right? The sector is declining and it keeps going down. And that is because the things that we are supposed to do to sustain the growth is confronted by, policy actions that are actually not optimizing the sector. And the gas side, you see, we are spending so much money to try and import LNG into Ghana, and our own gas is being flared. All right? Between 2019 and 2022, we flared over $395 million of gas. And all the energies of government has been to ensure that we import LNG into Ghana, whilst our domestic gas is flared. We are not optimizing that. We are not engaging the partners to be able to do that. And today we are being told that we have to do load shedding because one gas processing plant has gone down. But we could have done the investment or attracted the investment to be able to process the gas that we are flaring every year. Okay, let's go. Yes, so if you look at the 2023 budget, after the IMF asked us to now account for the energy sector payments that we're doing, because we're always paying the under-recoveries of the energy sector, but it was never finding its way in the budget. So this is how much government projects to spend for the under-recoveries in the power sector. And that's about 97 billion Ghana cedis by 2026. And I don't think we should continue to watch the energy sector consume this much money. Well, we are not doing even 5% of that in building social infrastructure. So we really need to be able to do that. Look at the projections, what we're going to spend in the social sector: agriculture, fisheries, education, gender, and health. 7 billion, 10 billion, 13 billion, 16 billion. But we are willing to spend more than 26 billion a year on the energy sector under recoveries. And we are fine to project that kind of expenditure in our country. Meanwhile, power is business. We just have to allow the right people to do the business. But the politicians will not let go because that's where they also milk. All right? It's not sustainable. These are drivers that we really have to check to be sure that we are not unnecessarily burdening the people, because the people have to pay for it. 2021, they just took a Eurobond that they borrowed at 8%. It sat in the bank for 1 whole year, paying interest, and then they took that money to go and pay IPPs for power people have consumed. All right? So we really have to pay attention to that and address those things. We keep, producing the documents, ESRP, and I'm sorry for the DPs, development partner. They keep helping us to develop policies, and after they have paid all the cost, we throw in the dustbin and do our own thing. We had the ESRP, Energy Sector Reforms Program, which was supported by the World Bank, USAID. And the document is not properly being implemented. We have set up a high-level panel to ensure that we can reduce the debt in the power sector. But the debt has rather been going up because the core actions that are supposed to be taken cannot even be controlled by the high panel that manages the ESRP. So we're still paying more and more in the sector. And again, we are diverting some of the streams that ordinarily would come into the budget to prop our fiscal situation. We recently had GMPC acquiring 7% interest in Jubilee and 10. And that 7%, as we speak today, is hiding in Cayman Islands. That's where GNPC has found home. So Ghana's laws are now not enough to control our own resources. We go and set up in Cayman Islands and operate that interest from Cayman Islands. All right. Some of the revenues, that were part of our projections for which we borrowed so much, have now been given to different entities. MIF is now handling our royalties, gold royalty, but it was all part of our revenue. And now MIF is sitting on billions of cedis, and the budget is struggling. All right? And that is the kind of system we are actually creating. And you ask whether people really care how we move out of the problems that we're in. Okay. So we really need to address these problems for us to be able to be sustainable as a country. We need to fix the procurement system. Benchmarking our borrowings against the GDP, I think, is not working for us. Because as I indicated, the GDP on the plus side has government expenditure. And if government expenditure is leaking into pockets, how do you account for that in your calculation of your GDP to be sure that we can actually repay the loans that we are actually borrowing? To be able to do that, we have to check our revenues and spend plus that revenue target, and not spend 50, 70% plus of our receipts, thinking that we can be able to pay because we have a GDP number that is bigger. All right. And we need to also reform the audit system and ensure that we can track how expenditures happen. We have to establish mechanisms to assess the effectiveness of our expenditures. And I think that is where all of us become important in that conversation. Now, if you are a lawyer and you're a banker and says that, oh, my job is not to track government revenue, when the haircut starts coming, you'll be part of it. So all of us have to be part of tracking government behavior to ensure that we don't get into these cyclical problems. So I think really I will have to end here for the conversation to start. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Benjamin Boakye is the Executive Director of the Africa Center for Energy Policy. And it seems Ben has made a lot of people sad in this room. I could just tell on the faces of most of you. I also saw Senyo Hoshi and David Ofosu-Dorte, combining to discuss a few things. Have you found a solution to our problems? Interesting, a lot of our key speakers are bald. I'm sure you all had a haircut. All right, so we're going to go for a quick break in studio, and then we'll come for our panel discussion. Call somebody to tune into TV3 right now, to also tune into 3FM 92.7. We're also live on Facebook. It's TV3 Ghana. We'll go for a quick break, and then we'll come back for our panel discussion quickly.
Open your eyes. People fall and they rise. Make you no worry about the things you know we change. The things you know we do today. You go do them tomorrow.
Ooh, wow, this girl's got talent. You too can change your world. And it's affordable with Airtel Tigo data bundles.
Bring your dreams to life with the best data bundles only on Airtel Tigo. Dial *111# now.
Airtel Tigo. Life is simple.
When the sun rises, there is hope. While this hope lingers on, the citizens look up to the government, the economy, the national development agenda, and everything in between.
On Ghana Tonight, it's our utmost priority to bring you insightful conversations on the economy, break down the biggest issues while setting the agenda for transformation and national development. The big and important stories are treated from the human interest angle, while the facts and the figures are painted with precision. So now, Let's cut the convention and start the conversation here on Ghana Tonight. I am your host, Alfred Okamsi.
Ghana Tonight shows Monday to Friday at 10 p.m. on TV3.
What's your take on an ideal guy?
I'm attracted to sapiosexuals.
Oh, sapiosexuals. Cool.
The smart guys.
See, I am one.
What's your take for the constitutional review?
See, they are really disturbing. They are worrying. Review. Constitutional review. The call for a constitutional review is not a bad call.
Really?
At all. Especially in the light of the fact that some laws have outlived their usefulness.
It was just gentlemen. I think Afena-Gyan.
Afena-Gyan? Who doesn't know Afena-Gyan? Excellent footballer. Dangerous. Tactical.
There's this show on TV. It's a music show. Mentor.
I like Mentor. See, my family watches Mentor. Everybody. Hey, see, everywhere Mentor.
Where edition?
Eh?
Where edition?
Mentor's gonna take you higher.
Don't be clueless. Stay on top of issues with 3news.com and tune in to Media General's radio platforms on the go using 3news.com. We are on a mission promoting access to quality health and education through the power of our media space. Since 2014, we have made great impact. TV3 mission now drives Ghana's quest to break barriers and provide access to inclusive and quality girls' education, together with women's maternal health services. Our mission to address the needs of the socially excluded has won the admiration of many. Indeed, TV3 Mission gets you the results. Mission is live on TV3 News 360 every Saturday and Sunday. Supported by Star Ghana Foundation, with thanks to Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office.
When it comes to the world of sports, what does complete mean to you?
When my team scores at the end of a 30-plus passing sequence, just like Pep Guardiola style.
When someone beats the buzzer with a shot from the logo, like Steph Curry.
Dominating opponents and punching my waist to a knockout like Africa's greatest boxer, Azuma Nelson.
Running so fast I can afford to celebrate midway through a 100-meter race and smash the world record like Usain Bolt.
Hold up, what makes all of these sports complete is the screen. This is where you get access to all the extensive highlights, analysis, and insights.
So do join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. live on 3FM 92.7 as we serve you the best sports buffet and most satisfying in the sports world. The 3 Sports team will come together to review, preview, and analyze the latest in the sports world here on Sports Ultras.
When the sun rises, there is hope. While this hope lingers on, the citizens look up to the government, the economy, the national development agenda, and everything in between.
On Ghana Tonight, it's our utmost priority to bring you insightful conversations on the economy, break down the biggest issues while setting the agenda for transformation and national development. The big and important stories are treated from the human interest angle, while the facts and the figures are painted with precision. So now, let's cut the convention and start the conversation here on Ghana Tonight. I am your host, Alfred Okamsi.
Ghana Tonight shows Monday to Friday at 10 p.m. on TV3.
All right, thank you very much and welcome to the 3 Business Summit live here from the Marriott Hotel. Gone by is a presentation by our 2 presenters, Benjamin Boachi of the Africa Center for Energy Policy, as well as Professor Bokpin, who's with the University of Ghana Business School. Ladies and gentlemen, join me welcome our panelists. David Ofosu-Dorte is a senior partner of AB and David Africa, a Pan-Africa business law firm with offices in 5 countries and a network of firms in a total of 24 African countries. His experience cuts across construction projects, project finance, the power sector, and public-private partnerships. He's also played lead advisory role in numerous infrastructure transactions and has been described as highly regarded and a highly esteemed figure for his diverse commercial practice as well as his experience in finance matters. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for David. Mr. Senyo Hosey is a finance and economic policy analyst. He's also a former chief executive officer of the Ghana Chamber of Bulk Oil Distributors. He has management experience across varying industries, including downstream petroleum, industry advocacy, public policy development, finance, logistics, and commodity trading. He holds an MBA in finance and an MA in economic policy management from the University of Ghana. He's been very instrumental in the development and implementation of major policies in the Ghanaian energy sector, notably the deregulation of the downstream petroleum sector. Ladies and gentlemen, Senyo Hosey, please put your hands together for him. Doris Ahiati is a co-founder and chief executive officer of Crescendo Consult Limited, a financial advisory, executive coaching and consulting firm. Prior to her role, she was a country director of ACCA Global, a leading global professional accountancy body, and vice president at Ghana's premier investment bank, Data Bank, where she led financial advisory and corporate finance transactions, macroeconomic and equity research, and founded the group's pensions business, which is currently worth over 1 billion cedis. Ladies and gentlemen, Doris Ahiati. Later, we'll try and also establish base with a lecturer at the University of Ghana Business Economics Department, Dr. Priscilla Chumesi, who is all the way in the United Kingdom. I'll start off with you, Senyo. You've had the presentations, you saw them walk you through. What are your initial remarks?
I think they are very reflective of our economic situation. There's a little note on what my floor mate said. Where's Prof. Bokpin? You were talking about a primary balance. You actually forgot to actually add that it's actually based on a projected GDP that may not happen as well. So the matter may even be much worse than he even presented. So we have a very dire situation, which is pretty unfortunate, very unnecessary. But the good news in the house is that it is fixable. I mean, Ghana is fixable. Ghana is not cuckoo yet. But we just have to agree to start taking the right decisions. It's a function of a failure of leadership and also a failure in the followership. Our general problem, I have said, is a trilogy of failure and includes most of the people sitting here. The elite citizens of Ghana have largely, I'm not saying everyone, but by and large, forgive me, as a social scientist, we think more at the mean. The average Ghanaian is looking at how to take advantage of the system. The average Ghanaian wants to leverage the relationships he can get in politics. But things go wrong. How many of us really say it? We are all waiting for Franklin Cudjoe or him there to really say something. But everybody reads the budget. You see the challenges in there. Everybody's looking for opportunities in the budget. You also have the markets, the banks, the regulators all sitting in there. We failed. All right? Every single act of government over the years has been heading towards a particular direction. You can't say without a PhD sitting in the central bank, this was not really seen. I mean, that would be a travesty of knowledge. That was obvious. We have a banking desk sitting in an economic desk sitting in every bank. But what have we seen? Banks not bank. And rather nurture government to be this reckless. That is a failure of the market. What were the banks thinking? Taking advantage of the opportunity to make huge returns, which is reasonable. But you have to look at sustainable returns. And you also have a responsibility to also have responsible returns. If the banks and the regulators, especially the central bank, put government in check, we won't be where we are. We must also remember that the central bank is practically the only guy within this, and then maybe it's the SEC regulator, within our economic of finance sector, who is actually defined as independent. The finance minister is never defined as independent. It is his job to really want to dive and pursue some kind of political end. Our surest protector is supposed to be our central bank. Our central bank failed us. Our banks, with all the knowledge and resources they had, also failed us. And I said the elite also did. Then you talk about government itself. That's the last stage of this entire trilogy of failure. And I deliberately didn't call them out last. Our political frame nurtures this kind of conduct. And it's not that we sitting here in this room don't know that our politicians are not really focused on sustainable economic development planning, but more on how to keep winning their elections. And it's also because of how we think and how resources are controlled by the state. We have a very powerful presidency. Everybody wants to, forgive my French, suck up to the presidency or the politics of the time and take advantage of it. You fund elections, you find a way to recoup it. So there's so many smelly and corrupt things that go on. What has Manasseh not done? What has Franklin Cudjoe not done? Now when you hear Franklin's voice, you hear Manasseh's voice, you hear, it does not start beginning to sound like a broken record. Who is really reacting to the knowledge, the research and investment that they make towards the social good of the country? Very little. Politicians have failed us. They are the ones responsible for leadership. But they have also failed not just because of they just being bad, it's because we've also been very bad followers. We must all share in this responsibility. Unfortunately, they are the ones we vote and they must take responsibility. But it is a trilogy of failure, and we must, for the first time, as Ben said, stop not caring and stop looking at just ourselves, waiting for a DD to hit us before we start shouting. The middle class are up in arms today only because they were about to lose some money. How many of them do you think will start up tomorrow to join Imani or ASEP to go and demonstrate tomorrow morning against any of these policies that are retrogressive towards our economic development? They won't. Trust me. They won't. And if you are not ready to put your skin in the game, then you should know that you're also failing the state. How many of us here have taking some money out of our pockets to donate to ASEP or to donate to Imani for all the great policy work that they do? How many? You see?
It's a trilogy of failure.
It's a trilogy of failure.
I will come back to you. Those were your initial comments. Doris, let me hear you.
Hello. Good morning to everyone in the room. I sat down looking at reflections that I believe most of us are aware of. And so it's nothing new. We've seen this happening. We've contributed directly and indirectly towards this. And for me, the sheer level of indiscipline that is reflected in the numbers and the trends that we saw in the two presentations was quite mind-blowing. And I touch on indiscipline because, you know, as you chart a path, you've got to be mindful of where you want to get to. And as far as intentionality requires, you should take those actions, make those choices, and pay the price that would get you to that destination in a sustainable manner. And I think that is where we have been in a hurry to get to that destination without being conscious and intentional about the paths that we are taking, about the choices that we are making. Because for every choice that we make, there are consequences. And I think we had forgotten when we were making certain choices about the ramifications of those choices that we were making. And today, it's the day of reckoning. The consequences have caught up with us. Everybody is feeling the pinch. And so we are all sort of rising up, speaking up when we could have done so much earlier. Another thing that hits me from the presentations that have happened is the quality of leadership. And I will not only lay it at the footstep of the political governance of the country, but I would also lay it at the doorstep of you and I, where we talk about personal or self-leadership. Because talking about accountability in the various roles that we sit, in the various benefits that we have demanded whether they were sustainable, whether we were mortgaging the future, we should have also thought about these. And we've all contributed towards something that is not sustainable, and today we have to find ways to begin to build. And the third thing that I want to touch on is trust and integrity in the midst of all of this. I think that by not standing up and standing on our grounds and making certain choices, we have broken trust, both at the individual level and more significantly at the institutional level, where trust is so diminished that even in instances where we feel that on this occasion we have the capacity and we have what it takes and we should contribute, we hold back because we cannot trust that this contribution is not going to go the same way that previous trends have gone. Senor just made reference to us contributing to these institutions that we know have called for accountability over and over. Sometimes you wonder, middle class reference, rising up speaking. We've seen middle class contribute to speaking up, and then they are silenced with certain positions and roles. All these undermine trust. And so I believe that thankfully we are here having this conversation today. I'm very optimistic that we'll share ideas and thoughts around how we begin to rebuild, how we can figure out avenues for thriving in this very dire economic situation that we find ourselves.
Thank you, Doris, for that introduction. Senior David, let me hear you. Do you get fascinated when you hear that comparison between Ghana and Singapore and Malaysia as well?
Not fascinated is not the right word, but before I come to that, I mean, in terms of my general reaction to the presentations, I try and say it as how do I call it, as polished as I can. I know I'm on TV. I understand in the local proverb, which is often put very crudely, that you don't step on the private parts of a wise man, but even that of a fool, you can only do it once, because the second time will really be so painful. I mean, the first one will be so painful, he won't allow you to do the second time, so to speak. And if we have felt this pain and we've gone to the IMF 18 times, I think the elite of this society ought to re-examine their mindset. Clearly, there's something wrong with that.
And this, you've been mild?
I'm being very mild. We ought to re-examine our mindset. I once actually tweeted something about the fact that where you have state-owned enterprises not doing well in the public sector hands, and we privatize them, and they equally collapsed, the elite must re-examine their mindset. There's something wrong with our mindset. We actually stopped thinking long ago in this nation. That's very... The other thing I gather, look at the charts again, especially the one presented. In fact, both of them, both Professor Bopin and Ben appear to present a chart which tells the same story. There's a significant difference between the parallel between us, Singapore and Malaysia, which is the question you are asking. From the 60s, or before the 60s when we all had independence, up to 84. Then the variance starts from 84. It's very clear, and I paid a lot of attention to it. Now, that was when we started the so-called Economic Recovery Program and Structural Adjustment Program. We should not forget that between 1973 to about 86, the IMF and World Bank were not in this country. They were not, because of that, a lot of champions into our policies. However, our attempt to restructure the economy itself has ended up in failure. In fact, there is almost nothing I can point out into this country, almost no major program that has succeeded. If you have one, just give me an example. When, for example, we have Tamawa Refinery having a debt, we set up a toll recovery debt. The debt is still there. The energy sector, the debt is still there. Every major program we have implemented to solve a problem has gotten worse. So nothing has been solved. And this is not about this government. I'm talking about from time immemorial. So again, I'm going back to something wrong with our mindset and how we do things. I'm still on this comment, and I'll come back to the Malaysia and Singapore one. For the first time, after listening to Beboachi, For the first time, I was struggling to remain an optimist. I'm a perpetual optimist. At times when I speak, people ask me, do you still have hope? And I said, yes, I still have hope. But I actually had to get up and go out to restore my optimism.
Wow.
Yeah. What hit me about his presentation is the extent to which we continue digging ourselves into holes, even when we are in a deeper hole. And that's what really, can you still remain optimistic? Now, there are certain things which are very basic, and I've had the privilege of being in the office of the Malaysian Prime Minister once. I've had the privilege of seeing Lee Kuan Yew in person. I've seen this, and being allowed to ask a question in a 2 hours, no holds barred interview. When you meet people like that, and you compare it to what you see around us, you don't have any choice but to come to a conclusion that we are dumb. Absolutely dumb.
That is not you being mild. That's not mild.
No, this is I'm being mild. So, and it's not because we don't have what it takes. We are just evil-minded people. Unfortunately, they keep talking about followership. I don't blame followership as much as I blame leadership. Maybe 99% at best I will give the followership 1%, because people get up and they say they want to lead, they want to change the situation, and they make it worse. The problem with our followership, though, is that we are what somebody called a power-distant people. We are okay to allow others to be powerful and for us to be less powerful. That's how we are. So you will see that unless it goes to the point where the elite are feeling the pinch of a debt exchange, they don't get up. But increasingly, people are talking, and I like what both Ben and I think Franklin Cudjoe said, because I get asked that question all the time. Why do you keep talking? And I said, what else can I do? Apart from that, nothing else I can do. So I think many more people should come out and remove the power distance from their mind. You don't need to jump on a political party side in order to be able to make a contribution. The evidence is obvious. Now, here, unless we understand what is really, really wrong, it's not with the IMF. It's not going to the IMF, which is very wrong. No. What is really wrong is the way we think. That is what is wrong. And for me, everything is mindset. And what I'm going to say may perhaps unsettle you a bit. I have a problem with a topic that deals with debt sustainability, right? The very idea that a society can decide that they want to sustain debt is a big problem for me. It's a very big problem for me. That we get up, 30 million people, that's what we want to do, sustain debt. So we get instructed, and this is 18 times, we get instructed that to sustain your debt, you need to maintain 55%. And that 55% is based on GDP. And that GDP includes the overspending that you have been overspending. That's the fact. I've said several times that we should stop measuring GDP because it doesn't help us. Once you benchmark your GDP to debt, what you are saying is that you are going to borrow more. So you are sustaining debt. You are not creating wealth. You are not thinking about how to make people less poor and rich. So in sum, and I will land on this, if you look at the taxes, you will realize that, and someone was reminding me of what I said during the Constitution Day, it is as if the state has decided that the private people have no right to have money. That's what it is. And go over and over from all the levies, all the way from toll recovery levy, etc. Anytime the state thinks we are getting money, they must come for it. They go and spend. So they find nice ways of coming for that money. I have messed up toll, I want to recover, you pay. I have messed up the power sector, I want you to pay. There is COVID, ESLA, we come and pay. So what it is that if you talk about the 40% additional impairment at the banks, this will reflect throughout the society. Essentially, the small margin we have, we should still give more. It's as if you don't have a right to have a net. You can't create wealth in a society where you constantly go and wipe away the margin that the people are creating. So we have not started thinking. That's the problem.
We've not started thinking. It's 34 minutes past 11. You're watching the 3 Business Summit. We're live from the Marriott Hotel. We're streaming live on Facebook, live on 3FM 92.7, also live on TV3. You've got to call a friend to tune into TV3 right now, because we've got Senor Hosi, we've got Doris Ahiat, we've also got Mr. David Ofosu-Dorotey, who is with AB and David. We're discussing the solutions, because I really want us to look at the solutions. Ben and Prof. Bokpin have told us about the problems. I need us to move the discussion forward into looking at solutions. I've got this long text message from one of our seasoned bankers. I don't think I need to mention his name. He says, we must be concerned about the impact of the domestic debt exchange program on private, domestically controlled banks. The foreign-owned banks will certainly get support from their parent banks and abroad, and will continue to handle the big-ticket, juicy transactions in Ghana. But what can privately local banks do? They are not to blame for the macro problems. Government is to blame for that. Let's remember that the local banks are the ones that support SMEs and individuals, so they play strategic roles. The World Bank is making some offers for all banks, but these are in dollars and will have to be repaid. So the issue of locally controlled banks and how government can support them to thrive after the DDEP needs critical attention. Such support must be long-term and in cities. There was also a question that Franklin Kujo wanted me to ask, and I think I'll ask Senor. Doris, you can also take a bite of it. It says, why don't we have an optimal tax regime? We take taxes on things that we want to spend on.
For starters, I think today Ghanaians should consider me very vindicated. Prof. Bokpin was here, and he said that we are not thinking. He also said that he's an academic, and academics also freely let out their thoughts. And my big brother, one of the finest thinkers in Ghana, get that clear, is undisputed, has also said we are not thinking. So those who are holding it against me, that I went to Legon to tell the academics, in freeing also freely sharing my thoughts, that they were not thinking. Today, we all know we are not thinking. That matter is today settled. Now let's move on. An optimal tax regime. Frankly, how do you want that to look like? You see, what is optimal? It becomes a matter of subjectivity. It becomes a matter of policy. Who drives policy? The policy makers, the policy actors are the ones who drive policy. Of course, the policy makers ultimately are the government and its institutions. The policy actors are every single person here who demands an action of government, like yourself and most of us sitting here. What do we demand of government? Do we have for our own self a definition of what's optimal? Our politicians are not thinking. It's no debate. Because they don't even have space to think. Have you visited a minister before? There are people who are lining up. When will this man get the chance to even think? And unfortunately, all the technocrats there, because we've heavily politicized our institutions, they themselves have lost their ability to think independently. They are looking for a signal from a minister. Go for a meeting with the directors and the ministers. Everybody's looking for where the minister or maybe his senior ally in the ministry will do. Then everybody wants to start speaking along that line. As if they can't think for themselves. So if the one who you are looking for guidance is not thinking, and you were supposed to think to support him, is waiting for his thought, what thinking will you get? So what is optimal? What is optimal? In Scandinavia, optimal is different. In America, optimal is different. But you cannot perpetually be taxing our way out of problems which never get solved. We create a vicious cycle. You are right about the third debt recovery levy. It's one of the most amazing levies in this country. It started, we had about 400 million cedis. I mean, way back then, maybe, I don't know, what that would be like 4, and we kept paying. The only debt that grows when you even pay down more is the third debt recovery levy. Then the ESLA, which I proudly let everybody know I'm the architect of. Yeah, but this was not a plan. Where are we? We can't finish paying because we are politicking and everyone sitting here is dancing along. This man will shout small and he's just good for one news. Then next time Obi Nim will do something and it becomes more important. Respectfully, when I see the followers of Shatawale versus the followers of Bernard Avle or the followers of Franklin Kujo, I know we have a problem. I'm telling you, we have a problem. The problem we have, we deserve it. Make no mistake about it. And I don't agree with my big brother about the followership. Who has been voting these people? Let one of us get up and say, look, at the end this MPP NDC, when they were increasing SOEs from 86 to 177, what were you doing? A lot of us were looking for who can give employment for somebody. The elite Ghanaian, who is privileged to know the people, was looking for employment. And me, I suffer that every day. Oh, they've opened this thing. GMPC is taking people. I hear that Bank of Ghana, you know people. That's what those who have access are looking for. Are they asking whether it's even wise for that place to be even employing? No. So what do you expect a politician to do? Please, David, revise this your thinking. The followers are Ghana's biggest problem. Because it's from the followership that our leadership comes. If the nonsense going up there is nonsense enough, the voting will change. Has the voting changed? Please. Who is asking the NDC what their alternative on the revenue bill is? Is anybody asking the question? Have they shown you any, apart from saying that you can't hold me responsible? Who is questioning MPP that when you went to do Kumiprekum, at that time, today, how come you are coming here? Who is, if today I said let's go on demonstration, who will follow? When the pensioners were looking for picketing, how many people were picketing at the place? How many pensioners did we have? These were our fathers who, they were even saying that during the DD, look, this is the thinking of the Ghanaian. DD, that as for them, they are old people. So as for the young people, they can pay, they can suffer the DDE. But they shouldn't suffer anything. Our parents forgot about their children. You have forgotten that. What do you think the politician is doing? He's not cutting his expenditure. He has forgotten about the people who put him there. He wants to still live large. There's no part of our budget, there's no reform. I'm not saying this post-COVID anything, showing any sense of responsibility. And we are largely quiet. When we started the DDE, and I was shouting, pam, pam, yeah, funds. I'm telling you, the day I say let's go do demonstration, I'll be alone. Everybody is scared of being victimized. Because that's the first call I get from everybody who calls me. The people will come after you. The people will come after you. So you're already thinking that people will come after you. So you are not moving. You have become immobilized. So what do you expect the people to do? All something right. For you. All right. Please, there's nothing optimal. The optimal problem is us. That's the problem. Doris, the optimal problem is us.
Right, Senor. Doris, I hear David talking about losing hope. There's so much despondency among the youth. Today we see a lot of people traveling outside the country in search for greener pastures. Where is this hope going to come from? I mean, I've heard a lot of talk about constitutional review. I've heard people suggest solutions on the way forward. Franklin here is talking about why not have an optimal tax regime. Now, there's so much of solutions out there. Who will trigger the implementation of these solutions? Because the politicians are not listening.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So I think this is where the private sector comes in. My thoughts on the optimal taxation was if we are giving value, a tax regime that gives value back to the people that are paying the tax. And if you look at the numbers that have been presented to us, we have a trend where we are not taking responsible actions in the direction of the expenditure trend of our government. And so, however much we might try to realize through revenue mobilization, institution of additional taxes, I believe that it's all just going down a very deep black hole. And it takes you and I, so that's why I wanted to take it from leadership and also take it from self-leadership. Because my observation as somebody who contributes to leadership transformation is the fact that, and when you talk about thinking, it all falls under leadership. I've seen a population that is always waiting for somebody to take that action to address problems for us. Whereas wherever we sit, we have got the power to take that first little action. And that first little action may be to sit down, reflect, and determine who might be in a position to contribute to the solution, where we can sit down, reflect, and arrive at how we can use the little resources that we have at our disposal to take that first action. Because usually when you have taken that first action towards the solution, you're likely to rally support around you. This Saturday I was in Kumasi, and I was at the Ghana Youth Agriculture Summit, where I contributed in the area of capacity building. And I'm referencing this because we talk about national agric policies. We talk about how we have hopped from an agric-dependent economy to services, leaving the middle, a very crucial middle, where we should be processing and creating enough jobs from what we are producing from agric. We hopped to import what we should be producing from the product, the output from agric. And we complain about very high post-harvest losses in this country. We have the personnel, we have the capacity, what it takes to transform our agric sector. So as a farmer myself, I'm a poultry farmer, I dabble in livestock and going into vegetable. I think that people have access to land. And referencing again this platform where we engage on what we can do as the youth. I was there to support somebody who has shown a lot of passion about encouraging the youth to go into agric. Some of you may have heard about a joke about somebody coming to the country, traveling and asking, what kind of plant is this? I can see that you grow it a lot, and it's actually bush in the countryside. So we have very fertile land that we could till, we could cultivate into what we consume. And that's also where the mindset comes in, where we sit here and we think it's only Thai rice, perfumed rice. And even if it is Thai perfumed rice produced in Ghana, we don't want to consume it. And so guess what? I'm aware that there is Ghana produced rice that is being bagged and branded as imported, and Ghanaians are happy to patronize these products. So these are the little things. It starts with you and I. Look at the choices. Today I chose to come here in an African print. A seamstress in Ghana converted the fabric into this. Our textile industry is collapsing. If we patronized it, I was very happy to see those who were wearing something African, because you've created jobs for those that designed what you are wearing. Why can't we allow citizens to wear whatever, to work Monday to Friday, but we restrict it to Friday? And we create jobs at the country where we are importing these shirts and suits and ties from. We have to re-examine our culture. And I think it goes back to us aspiring to something which we saw in the early days of independence, and we thought this is beautiful. We thought this is the lifestyle. And so we actually call things that are imported as homemade. Meanwhile, this is our home. Right. I keep, when I do financial planning, asking you, look at your budget list, the items that you have there. And I'm not saying that I'm completely innocent. I have children who want to eat imported cereals for breakfast. I'm not in favor of it. I'm trying to transform it. But this is where the problem comes from. And I believe that if we are looking at where to get the hope from, one, there is adopting that positive mindset that we can do something about this. I think our news channels are too much awash with negative news. And like the mood in the room changed when the reality dawned on us of how bad the situation was. Right. The brain is such that when you feed it with certain negativity, it cripples its creativity. Right. And so the facts and the truths are there, but let's see how we balance it with the spots where we have some positive developments, people contributing to address the solution, and see how it influences and energizes all of us, stimulate our creative juices to each begin to brighten that little corner where we are. All right, Doris. Mr. David Officer-Dotto, before I come to you, let's hop live to the United Kingdom. I'm told we have Dr. Priscilla Chumesi
live on Zoom. Is that right? Do we have Dr. Priscilla Chumesi on the line? Hello? All right, David, let me hear you. So where is the solution going to come from?
Well, I think it includes what we are doing. And I want to go back to Senyor's point, and we should be very careful about blaming the people for the mistakes of leaders. And I want to just take an example from what Doris just said. The shoe I'm wearing is made in Ghana. I've worn Israeli made in Ghana shoes for about the past 15, 20 years. But if you want those who make shoes in Ghana to have volumes, then the police boots, for example, should be made in Ghana. But if you elect somebody to go into politics and is more interested in giving the procurement process to somebody who imports the boots from China, then he wouldn't create jobs. So I'll talk to you after this. There is a program I'm working on to boost wear in Ghana. I'm very Pan-African, so I'm more about wear in Africa than. But it doesn't matter how much wear in Africa or wear in Ghana you promote. If it is somebody's duty to import the fabric from China, it doesn't matter that we have cotton here and we have textile and yarns in Japan. They will still make it a procurement issue. So, yes, followership have a duty, but followers are doing what they are supposed to do. Otherwise, we won't be sitting here. That is why Imani and you are organizing this, so that whether the leaders here or not, we have done our part. But when leaders ignore all the data and do the wrong thing, we cannot blame followers for that. Yes, the only chance to change them is once every 4 years or once every 8 years. And followers are doing that. I think Ghanaian followers have shown enough over the since 1992.
Are we changing or reshuffling?
Well, we're changing for almost the same thing. But that's the only options they have.
Can we change the options?
Let me make my point. At least I have not seen a third option that, and I'm not talking about you or me. I'm talking about followers. I want to. No, let's go there. The point I'm making is that when leaders fail and we blame followers did not check them, it gives the leaders too much comfort. That's the point I want us to.
You find it rather simplistic.
It's something that, now let's take data, and I like to use what they presented. And I made this in public. When e-levy was being pushed, I said, I am not exactly against e-levy, but I just want to look at the thinking. 16 million people vote. The only thing the two political parties always agree on is how to educate us about voting. That one, they come together. They will tell you how to fold the paper, how to put your thumbprint. They will have yes, and there's Gracia and things like that. They will tell us to vote. Okay, I said if 16 million people vote and less than 4 million people have bank accounts, there is something wrong with the society and the mindset of the people. Why do you want to introduce e-levy? Why is it that if a lot of people are doing Momo, why don't you rather decide that all the banks, all the telcos should automatically convert every Momo into a bank account? 0 bank account, automatically. Now check those Momo accounts which have not got a TIN number. It was a massive opportunity to pull those outside the tax bracket into the tax system. And I made this on TV and everywhere. Because once you draw them into the tax system, they are into the banking system. If you don't have a TIN number, I will take 5% turnover tax of every money that goes into your account. If you have a TIN number, I won't tax you. Because you already have a TIN number, you are paying tax. You see, there are only 3 ways to raise revenue in the public sector. 3 ways. One is to take more from those who are already paying. That's what we are doing. GRA itself once issued a statement that only 38% of taxpayers have ever been audited. And my firm has been audited every single year since 2011. I've always made that point. And as soon as I make that point, they come. Every year. But if you are saying only 38% have been audited, then clearly what about the 62%? They are not even been audited. So somebody is under declaring. You saw what happened when they went to some shops, etc. Okay, so my first point is you can get those who are already paying to pay more. We seem to be doing a lot of that. 2, is to get those who are not paying to be brought into the tax bracket. We are not doing that. 3 is to get those who are paying to pay higher of what they are paying of the same. What we are doing is that we are getting those who are paying to pay a variance more and then pay higher of what they are already paying. And leaving those who are not. If you can mobilize 16 people to vote, 16 million people to vote, and you can't mobilize that same people to have bank accounts, you have a fundamental problem in thinking. And that's what you need to focus on.
That's a tight one.
And yes, and the followers are doing their best by putting these suggestions out there. I have said, and if you look at my tweet today, that if a leader or leaders decide to listen to only the people in their circle and leave those who are outside their circle, because some of us will never wear NDC or MP shirt. We won't. We don't want to do politics. The only thing we can do is to contribute like this. But when leaders in both political parties decide to listen to only people within their circles, they have done 2 things. 1, they have alienated the size of the information source from which they will make decisions, because leaders must make decisions from considering all information. 2, they have expanded their size of their ignorance and set themselves up to fail. Because you are, yes, that's what it is. You are listening to only the people around you. You are expanding the size of your ignorance, because what you don't know is larger than what you know. So the followers are doing their best. Everything is out there. We say it. You've interviewed me several times. The last time myself and Andani, I have said over and over again, I will never understand why Bank of Ghana increases monetary policy rate as a way of solving inflation. Our culture is such that it doesn't work. Some theories in America, because everybody in America is carrying a credit card, if you increase the thing by 0.2%, they will stop spending. Here, everything is paid for. You don't take credit. Everything is paid for. When you increase monetary policy rate, you are indirectly, just give me a second on that. You are indirectly, and these are structural issues. They are thinking issues. You are indirectly withdrawing from the business sector the ability to produce. As soon as more money chases that, a few things, inflation will go up. It's worse. And now I'm happy the the treasury bill is coming down. I want it to come down as low as possible. Because what we were doing is simply saying I can fold my arms, give my money to government, and every month I go and collect over 30%. Who is producing? That's why inflation is being caused. And we solve it with something designed for America. Let me conclude on this. I have said the economic theory we use to solve our problems is just like an Apampemu store at Butumejebu adopting Goldman Sachs strategy to implement a strategy. That's exactly what we have done.
Store. Interesting there. Wow, that's huge clap for him. Let me go on the line now straight to the United Kingdom. I'm told Priscilla has been on the line for a long time. Prissy, I'm sure you've been listening to a lot of the conversation. I'm sure you also went through that presentation by Dr. Bokbin and ASAP. What are your comments on this? What's happening to the Zoom connection? Yes, Priscilla.
No, we can't hear you.
What's happening to her sound? I think you're on mute, Priscilla. Can you unmute yourself? She's not on mute.
She has unmuted. That's what she's saying. And you can see that on the screen that she's unmuted.
Yes, so is a problem coming from inside? Okay, let's move on.
There's a song. First time fool is not a fool. Second time fool is not a fool. Third time fool is a fool. How can you be voting 7 or 8 times and you keep doing the same thing and same thing and same thing? And you are saying that you yourself, you are not a fool. My brother, forget. Look, we have options. Either we look for the right leadership, or we take on the leadership and force them to reform. And that needs social activism, not English. You understand? Not English. This man spends time, he thinks, he writes. You don't fund him one person. If they do a short code, you won't give him anything. Gather people. You want everything, but you want to give nothing. Change, repent. Jesus is coming. Yes, that's the first line. When you repent and you want good leadership, at least now we are beginning to realize the impact of leadership on our everyday life. We are so distant from leadership that it's just a matter of news in the morning. And okay, if I get this, already I was already suffering before the people came. As long as the suffering doesn't increase, no while. If it increases, we are all suffering. Till one day they put a hand in your pocket. DDE. They came into your pocket. Then now you wake up and you are shouting. Please, the followers are a problem in Ghana. In the beginning, I used to believe what he was saying. But I realized that no, we can't keep doing the same thing. It's the same kind of, the NDC people who are coming next are likely the same people you are seeing. The MPP people who are going to come again, you have seen them already. So it's two things. Either you look for somebody else and change the way you are choosing your leaders, or you change your leaders by social action.
What about the structure of our governance system? Because whichever new person we're bringing is also part of the system.
Hey, no. You see, to be fair, let me make this one note before I come to this answer. When things are not going right, you take action. When the politicians see that 1, 2, 3, you're on the streets, 1, 2, 3, you are hard at them, and you are not doing NDC, MPP politics over common sense, at that point, their attitude will change. Politicians react to the culture and the temperature of the citizenry. Make no mistake. They feel it. But when they know they can run with something, they run. The DD, if we didn't react, do you think they would have changed it? What are you talking about? If you act, they were feeling the heat. They realized that this thing could be wrapped into something else. So they were afraid of the social consequences of the action and the kind of reaction that they had from the private sector. But that was their DD. If that is happening every day, it's happening over corruption. It's all happening over everything these people write. It's happening you funding them to make sure they give you better information so that you know how to act. Do you think our politicians will continue like this? Everybody wants power, so they'll start behaving. Culture is defined by what you reward and what you punish. We don't punish our politicians for anything. We wait for 8 years. You will die before one of the 8 years will come. You understand? Anyway, you asked me some question. What was that?
I asked about the governance structure.
Governance structure. The governance structure is a problem. But this same structure can be a force of good. And that's where his leadership matter comes. I don't believe in the kind of governance structure, not because the structure is inherently bad, but I think that the culture of the Ghanaian is not fit for this structure. This structure needs somebody with good values and a good heart to really transform a country. This is the kind of power a Lee Kuan Yew will use and transform an economy. A Kagame will use to transform an economy. This is the kind of power. A power that gives you permeating authority almost through every single system. And that means that it will reflect your culture, your heart, and your value system. What's the value system of the Ghanaian? What is the type that we have in our leaders that we give the power to? That is the only reason why I believe our system, our governance system has changed, and we desperately need a constitutional review. Because we have entrusted men who want elected themselves to really lead and serve us, and they only serve largely themselves.
I'm going to ask our audience
there's some recommendations that were made.
Right.
For our kind of governance, you have to dissipate, you have to spread power. So not one person can do just anything. When you do small, no, you are exposed. So our institutions, which is supposed to be the bedrock for most of our policy implementation, we can't continue to have a president appoint everybody like that. A board that is fully dominated by politicians. Imagine the MP, the Petroleum Commission, dominated largely by technocratic representations. You have NDC, MPP, all represented on the board. Then they appoint a CEO properly. Everybody comes to compete for it properly. It is easier for CSOs to really take on and make sure systems are predictable. Here, the petroleum sector is not growing because there's policy inconsistency. There's a lot of political and policy arbitrariness. So for people to invest, you take ENI, you take all of them. For them to keep putting money, they'll struggle. And then even though petrol prices even went up, we were able to optimize it.
So our institutions, especially our key economic institutions, need proper reform. Reforms that take partisan politics significantly out, or you neutralize partisan politics partly in. All the politicians should be represented, minority and majority, they should be there. But more importantly, you have technocratic institutions and civil society dominate a bit of this space.
So I hear you say that we cannot separate the governance from the economic. David, you agree with that?
You can't.
I mean, they are intertwined. I think Senor and I are saying the same thing. The point is that in the period that leaders are doing the wrong thing, so followers can make activism. To blame followers is a big issue. And I'll just put it like that and let's move on, because I think it gives leaders too much comfort. Followers should continue pointing out to leaders that they are making, and that's part of the things he is doing. Now, he had the privilege of being the guest speaker at his Constitutional Day lecture. He's chasing me for the paper. Now, I made a statement, and I want to repeat that statement here. I'm a lawyer, all right. I believe the Constitution requires a few amendments, but I'm not a believer in a massive amendment of the Constitution. And I'm going to repeat the statement I made. No law on earth is good enough to stop evil-minded people from doing wrong. And no law on earth is so good that if a person, no, it's so bad that if a person wants to do good, he will not do good. And I'll give you just one example. We've talked about the size of our cabinet over and over. The Constitution, so far as I interpret it, says we have 19 cabinet ministers. That's what the Constitution says. You go and read it. But we distinguish cabinet from ministers, and we create 80, 50, 60, 126. When a person wants to do what he wants to do, he will go around the law. So what you need is a situation where we draw people's attention continuously, including the activism. But when we rush to amend the Constitution, it takes so long, and in the meantime, things are going bad, and the politicians are waiting, okay, amend the Constitution, let us be our turn. Look, I get asked several times, every time, why are you not going into politics? And I said I won't. The reason is very simple. I have told you, in the current context of the mindset we have, it is easier for an evil-minded person to win an election than for an honest person to win an assembly seat. That's the nature of our
society. Said that?
Yes.
You said that?
Yes.
And you repeat it?
I have tweeted it before. It's far easier for somebody who wants to corrupt the system to win an election than for an honest man to win an assembly seat.
I am told we're running out of time for live coverage. I don't know, Francis, is it going to be possible for Facebook to continue? The digital will continue. We can continue. We'll continue on digital. Okay, so we're going to continue live streaming on TV3 Ghana, but of course, the television would have to break for our news. In fact, we've eaten into their time. It's, I think, it's almost 10 minutes past 12. So we're going to allow for TV3 News to take it over now. We'll continue with our digital. You're still watching the 3 Business Summit, the first of its kind, happening live at the Marriott Hotel. We've got Senyo Hosi, who's a former Chief Executive Officer of the Chamber of Bulk Oil Distributors. Doris Ahiati is a consultant, financial consultant. Of course, David Ofosu-Dorte is a legal practitioner with AB and David. I need to allow for our audience to ask a few questions.
Hello, thank you for staying with TV3, and we are going to go straight into the big stories we have for you this afternoon, having to do with news. Coming up for this afternoon's edition of Midday Live, 1 immigration officer shot dead, 2 others in critical condition following attacks in Boko. It is the latest incident on trouble that rocked Boko as tensions rise. Also coming up, mixed reactions greet the NPP's directive barring national, regional and constituency executives from contesting in constituencies with sitting MPs. We ask, what does this mean for the party ahead of the primaries? Later in business, experts lament excessive borrowing, wasteful expenditure and corruption as causes of Ghana's debt crises are the maiden edition of 3 Business Economic Sustainability Summit. And on the international front, Donald Trump is preparing to face criminal charges in historic New York court hearing. All right, let's settle for the details of our stories now. An immigration officer stationed in Boko in the Upper East region has been shot dead by unknown gunmen. It happened earlier on Monday. 2 other officers are currently on admission at the Boko Presbyterian Hospital and the Tamale Teaching Hospital receiving treatment from gunshot wounds.
The 3 officers were Assistant Inspector Philip Mote, stationed at Misiga, Assistant Inspector Lawrence Safari, stationed at Kulungugu, and Assistant Inspector Eric Ayidia, stationed at Pulmakum Border Post. They reportedly went to Boko Township in their private car to buy food on Monday, April 3, at about 8 p.m. when the incident occurred. Unknown gunmen suddenly opened fire on them in front of the Boko police station. The 3 were rushed to the Boko Presbyterian Hospital, but Assistant Inspector Philip Mote was confirmed dead on arrival. Assistant Inspector Eric Ayidia was transferred to the Tamale Teaching Hospital in critical condition, while Assistant Inspector Lawrence Afari was being treated for gunshot wounds at Boko Presbyterian Hospital. A statement signed by the Boko Sector Commander, Assistant Commissioner of Immigration Emmanuel Intim-Denchi, and cited by TV3 said the remains of Assistant Inspector Philip Mote has been deposited at the Boko Presbyterian Hospital morgue for preservation. The Boko municipality has been
I'll be 77 in October. I've never done in this country. I am a seasoned businessman. I know everything here. You guys should be in politics. You shouldn't be sitting here talking. But one thing I'd like you to do, next year, the same date, next year, April 4th, we are going to meet here again. I'll contribute towards this meeting again. All of us, we are going to evaluate the situation. We're wasting our time. We're going to evaluate the situation. Another is a friend. Mahama is a friend. I know everybody. But what is happening in this country? You talk until you have it. Let's move forward and develop this country. We should all be blamed for what is happening in this country today. This man here, for the past 6 weeks, Senor, you've done so much for this country. But you don't want to come to politics? You want to make business? Let's stop it. Come and waste time in politics. This gentleman here, because of you I came, because I listened to you the other day. You have brains. You don't want to go to politics. Oh, I'm so disappointed. Franklin, next year, we'll bring the same thing here next year, and I'll contribute towards it. That's all I'll say, because we have to evaluate what we've done, we are doing today. We're doing something for Ghana today. Let's evaluate the situation next year. This talks